Color grading always has an important role in video game development, and that's because it's the main element that gives mood and atmosphere to the image. Color grading is a post-production process, a final sweetening of the image. There are two steps of coloring: color correction and color grading. Color correction comes before color grading. It consists of harmonizing our image to have a neutral base to be worked on. During this step, it's necessary to correct the white balance, equalize the exposure, choose the tone mapping algorithm, and also a dynamic range mode. This step is very important, and when done well, will save a ton of time when we shift to color grading. Once we complete this step, we move on to color grading. This is where we give character and atmosphere to our scene. We can play with curves, masks, trackballs, and other precise tools to land the look that we are looking for. After that, we can apply other effects such as chromatic aberration, vignette, and even grain to give an organic look and texture to our image. We will cover them in depth in the upcoming lectures. In Unity, disable the light meter from the post-processing debug component, then go to the post-process volume and add the color grading effect. The color grading effect is the most complicated filter in the post-processing stack due to the number of properties that affects it. This is why we're going to split it into two parts. The first property that the color grading filter has is the mode, which is set to high definition range by default. If you want to check if the HDR is enabled, go to Edit, Project Settings, Graphics, make sure that it's set to desktop, then under low, medium and high tiers, make sure that use HDR is enabled, and if it's not, uncheck use default and check it manually. Go back to the inspector. We have three modes to choose from: high definition range or HDR, low definition range or LDR, and external. When choosing HDR, we get much more HDR color space. HDR, which stands for high dynamic range, allows for more brightness, very vivid colors, and deep blacks. It's recommended for high-end desktop and console platforms. On the other hand, the low definition range has limited capabilities, and it's commonly used for low-end platforms. The LDR mode comes with its own properties, which are lookup texture and contribution. Lookup texture, also known as LUT, and it's an optimized way of performing color grading. Instead of tweaking the individual channels, as in color correction, only a single texture is used to produce the corrected image. Contribution is a weight variable that controls the contribution of the LUT to the final image. 1 means 100%, while 0 means 0%. External uses a LUT to control all of the color grading process. Now set the mode back to HDR, as it gives much more color space to work on. Then let's move on to tone mapping. The relation between HDR and tone mapping is that HDR allows the video card to exceed the 0-1 range when rendering, and it supports greater details when rendering. But in order to be displayed on the monitor, the values should not exceed the 0-1 range. This is why we use tone mapping to convert the result back to 0-1 range to be displayed on the screen. The options are neutral, ACES, and custom. Neutral does range mapping with minimal impact on color hue and saturation, and is generally a great starting point for extensive color grading. ACES, which stands for Academy Color Encoding System, and is also known as filmic. ACES is more contrasted than neutral, and has an effect on actual color hue and saturation. It also gives a more cinematic look and provides the best optimal precision and result. If you want to create a custom tone mapping, I will provide you with a PDF file that has a lot of details on how to do that. Now let's select ACES, as it gives a cinematic look to our scene. White balance is used to adjust colors to match the color of the light source, so that white objects appear white. White balance is affected by two properties: temperature and tint. Temperature is about setting the white balance to a custom color temperature. Positive values gives more orangey warm colors to the image, while negative values gives a more cold bluish look to the image. In real-world cameras, temperature is measured in Kelvin blackbody scale, which is typically starts from 2500 K, and that will make your image very cold, and then goes all the way to 10,000 K, which will make your image very warm. In Unity, It's the same concept, but it starts from -100 and goes up to 100. Tint sets the white balance to compensate for a green or magenta tint. But that's not always the case. In some cases, you may want to use an incorrect white balance, because correcting the white balance will exclude the effect of the light source. Candles are primary examples. We know that candles emit orangey warm glow, and on the Kelvin scale, that's way down to 2100 K. If we set the white balance for a candle, the whites on the screen will look white and the skin color will render correctly, but it will look completely unreal. If you want to set a correct white balance, you have to use your eyes and adjust these two properties so that white objects appear white. I will only decrease the temperature to -5, as it will give a nice push and give a cool vibe to our scene. Our final step in the color correction is to equalize the exposure. As the ACES color space typically give a darker look, we can crank up the exposure value by a little to give more exposure to the scene, and I'm going to set it to 0.35. This is it for the color correction. We will be adding mood and atmosphere to our environment. Once we've completed the color correction, we can now move on to color grading. The first property that we encounter is the color filter. This property will affect the colors directly and shift them to the color that you picked. Hue shift. The hue refers to the dominant color family and also to the origin of the colors that we can see. Hue is measured in angles, and in unity, the hue shift starts from -180 to 180. Saturation. Color saturation refers to the intensity of colors in an image. Contrast. Contrast describes the difference between different color hues. You can use the channel mixer to adjust the color balance of your image. The channel mixer has 3 inputs, red, green, and blue. If you look at the red input, you'll notice that the red value is set to 100, and the green and blue is set to 0. If you increase the influence of the green channel on the overall mix of the red channel, all areas on the final image that include a green tone tend to a more reddish hue. Trackballs are a 3-way color grading. Adjust the position of the point on the trackball to shift the hue of the image. The properties are lift, gamma, and gain. Lift is used to adjust the dark tones, in other words, the shadows. Gamma. Gamma adjusts the midtones, which are in most cases the overall colors of the image. And finally, gain. The gain is used to adjust the highlights. Before moving to grading curves, we need to adjust the previous properties. I'm going to increase the saturation to 15 and the contrast to 10. For the trackballs, I'm going to increase the lift to make the shadows more clear, then tint it a little towards orange. For the gamma, I'll push it more to make it brighter, then I'll tint it towards blue. And the gain, I will also push it to make the highlights more luminant, then I'm going to tint it slightly to blue. Now, moving on to grading curves, which are affected by 4 properties: hue versus hue, hue versus saturation, saturation versus saturation, and luminance versus saturation. Using these 4 grading curves, you can achieve awesome effects. As an example, we can create the famous Sin City effect. Select the hue versus saturation, click override, then double-click on the white line to modify it. Now if you change its vertical position, you can see that the image becoming more or less saturated. If you want only the orange neon light to glow and the rest in grayscale, all what you need to do is to add 2 additional points on the curve and adjust the curve so the rest of the colors are grayscaled. And if you want to change the orange to other color, you can do that by adjusting the hue versus hue grading curve. This is it for the color grading effect. See you in the next lecture.